Jan Wilson had been happily married to Pete for 12 years. Pete was her everything. He was the solid foundation of her life. Their sex life had become very predictable and somewhat boring after Stephanie, their only child, had been born 3 years ago, but she loved him unconditionally. Jan had worked for the steel company for the last 8 years. Her former female boss had recently been replaced with a handsome, dynamic young man, Brad Jennings, who was about 7 years younger than January. Jen felt a lust building for Brad. It's not that she ever thought of him as a replacement for Pete, she did think about him as a sexual partner. She constantly eyed Brad when he was talking to others or simply walking past her. She had begun having dreams about the various things she and Brad would do to each other. She just thought of these as her naughty fantasies and never attempted to act on them, but recently, these fantasies had become completely consuming during her waking hours. She was becoming very nervous and daydreamed about Brad all of the time. Pete had commented more than once that she seemed to be a million miles away in her thoughts. It seemed that fantasized sexual exploits with Brad were all she ever thought about anymore. This did seem to stimulate her to be more aggressive with Pete and ask for some things they had not done in many years in their lovemaking, but even when Pete was bringing her to a climax, all she could think of was Brad doing it to her. She would have been content to just continue with her fantasy, but events overtook her and brought her fantasies to reality. Brad had asked her to stay late to work on a contract proposal for an important client. He was the perfect gentleman during their evening work. After reviewing the final draft of their proposal, Brad smiled and nodded, "Yes, this is great. Thanks so much, January. Why don't I buy you dinner as a reward for a job well done?" Jan thought about it for a second, and her lust finally overcame her better judgment. "Okay, let me call Pete and tell him so he doesn't worry." She dialed their home, and when Pete answered, said, "Pete, honey, Brad is so pleased with my work tonight he wants to buy me dinner on the company as a thank you. Isn't that wonderful? So I will be a little later getting home, okay?" Pete was happy for her. She had expressed fears to Pete several times since Brad had become the boss that Brad didn't think much of her work, since he never gave her any praise or even acknowledged the quality of her work. Pete said, "Way to go, honey. You are finally getting some well-deserved recognition. Enjoy the dinner. I have an early appointment tomorrow, so I will probably be asleep when you get home." They expressed their love for each other, and each hung up. Brad drove Jan to the most posh restaurant in the city. He was suave, funny, and attentive to Jan before and during their lovely candlelight dinner. He told her about his life. He was a Stanford graduate, divorced a year now, with one daughter he got to see weekly. He loved his daughter and showed Jan pictures of them together. He still thought he had feelings for his ex, but hoped to eventually lose the mental anchor and get back to having a relationship with someone. Jan told him about her family and her love for her husband and daughter. She did reach out on several occasions and touch Brad's hand as she told him some story about a family trip or family event that she was proud of. Brad paid for dinner, and they waited at the door for the valet to bring Brad's car around. Brad put his arm around Jan's shoulder and kissed her cheek. "I had a great time. Thanks for being a wonderful date, Jen." Against her better judgment, Jan put her arm around Brad's waist and kissed his lips lightly. "I really enjoyed this, Brad. Here's a kiss for being a great boss." Their heads were only inches apart. Brad looked at her with a flare in his eyes. He touched her chin with his index finger and raised her head to look into her eyes. He brought his lips to hers, and the two embraced tightly as they kissed. Brad's car arrived, and Brad moved slowly to the car with his employee clutching tightly to him. He placed her in the car and, without a word, drove them to his apartment. Jan had intermittent thoughts about what she was doing was wrong, but the lust drove rational thoughts from her mind. They immediately fell into Brad's king-sized bed and explored each other's bodies for several hours. He did things to her that Pete had never done. It was well after 1 a.m. when they lay exhausted together. "Brad, I have to get home. I really should not have done this, but you have been a fantasy of mine ever since you became my boss." Brad nodded his head and said, "I have wanted you since the day I started. I was almost scared to talk to you because I was afraid you would see me lusting for you. Jan, can we do this again?" "Yes, Brad, we can do it whenever we get a chance. But understand, I don't love you. I just want to have sex with you." I love my family and will do nothing to compromise that relationship, but I will do things with you that I never would imagine doing with my husband." They then stood and moved to the shower to clean the evidence of sex from their bodies. Dressing quickly, Brad drove her back to her car at the office. They French kissed in the car for several minutes, and then Jan broke away. "Enough for now. I have to get home before Pete becomes suspicious." Jan arrived home to find Pete sound asleep. She looked at her husband lying in the bed and thought, "I do love you. This is just a fling. I'm sure I will tire of Brad in a short while. You will never, ever know, and we will live as husband and wife until our dying days." From that evening for the next 6 weeks, Brad and Jan met at various motels, at Brad's apartment, in Brad's office, and even once in Jan's living room. They were animals in heat. Brad admitted he needed sexual release after more than a year of no sex following his divorce. Jan admitted she needed some wild and kinky sex to spice up her life. She was even becoming more suggestive to Pete about trying some new things. Pete eyed her with some suspicion when she suggested he take her in different ways. "Where did you learn about this, honey?" He suddenly felt guilty. She dropped down and turned to Pete. "Oh dear, I have been reading too many sex novels lately. I'm sorry if I suggested something you don't want to do." Pete shook his head. "No, it's not that. I just find you so aggressive these days, and you seem to have experience already with the things you're asking me to do. You are acting like my teacher, not like my lover." Jen almost panicked. "I'm so sorry, dear. I just thought we could try some new things. I promise to stop reading the books that are giving me these ideas." Pete just smiled and hugged her. "You can read what you want. Just give me time to adjust to trying this new stuff, okay?" Jen went to work the next day, walked into Brad's office, and closed the door. She told Brad they would have to cool it for a while, at least. Her husband was getting a little suspicious of her new knowledge of sexual positions and actions. She was also feeling a little guilty about becoming her husband's sex teacher. "Jan, you really should tell Pete that we are having sex, not as lovers, but as friends with benefits, as they say today. It would certainly relieve you of the guilt you seem to feel and make our relationship open and above board. Pete would just have to understand that you're just getting an itch scratched and that it means nothing to either of us. It would also explain how you are finding out and getting experience with these new sex acts." Jan moaned as Brad continued his massage. Brad went on, "Are you telling me your sex life at home is not a million times better since we started doing each other?" Jan had to admit that her sex life with Pete was now bordering on fantastic. She leaned forward and kissed Brad deeply. "God, I don't want to stop this yet. You do make me hot and horny." After this, she thought for several days about telling Pete about Brad. It was becoming more difficult to hide her liaisons with Brad. Pete would be crushed if he found out about Brad through some careless action or remark from her. Jan discussed this with Brad twice more as they rendezvoused with each other at Brad's apartment. "I think I do need to tell Pete about us. He would be crushed if he found out about us through some stupid accidental event. I think I can make him understand that this is just a fling and when it is over, things will be just like they were, except we will have a much better sex life." Brad nodded. "Yes, I think you should. I don't want to be the cause of you breaking up or anything like that. I do like Pete, and I know he loves you a lot. It would hurt him if he found out about our escapades, a hurt so deep he might do something stupid. You have to tell him in a way that will lessen the pain and make him see the long-term outcome. I will do it tonight. He will understand." Jan replied. Pete had arrived home from work before Jan and had just finished showering. He was going to take her out to dinner tonight with their daughter. He loved these family evenings together. These two women were his whole life. As he opened the shower glass door, he saw a small drop of water that seemed to be inside the glass. Apparently, the door had 2 panes of glass, and somehow the water had made its way between the panes. It was just at a level so it was hard to miss the little bubble of water. Pete thought to himself, "Well, I guess I better have that door fixed. Water should not be getting inside it. So, we can either take the door apart and rebuild it, or just junk it and get another one." Pete toweled off and began dressing. He was pulling on his trousers when Jen walked in. "Hi honey," she said. "Hi yourself. You better get ready for dinner, you're running a little late, Pete replied. Pete had no way of knowing that Jan had stopped by Brad's on the way home and now had his juices running down her thigh. This was the first time she had actually brought signs of Brad home with her, but she had needed fortification that what she was going to tell Pete tonight was the right thing to do. Brad had screwed her, and then they had talked through what Jen would say to Pete. Jen turned the shower on and closed the shower door. Pete took that opportunity to tell her about the problem with the door and the drop of water. He told her that the door would either have to be rebuilt or replaced. She began to slowly undress, and when she got to her panties and bra, Pete sucked in his breath. Jan, what is that on your thigh? It looks like traces of love, Pete asked nervously. It is, my darling, but let me explain, okay? It's not what you think, Jan began. You see, Brad and I. Pete cut her off. What do you mean it's not what it looks like? It's another man's traces of love dribbling from your snatch. It's your boss's traces of love. You're cheating on me. Pete grabbed his head with both hands and dropped to the edge of the bed. Jan walked over and sat on the edge with Pete. She put her arm around him. Pete, yes, I am having sex with Brad. In fact, it's great sex. But it means nothing. I only love you. Sex with Brad is just that, sex. We are just two friends with benefits. It means nothing and doesn't change anything between you and me. Jen felt good about the way she was ensuring Pete that the affair meant nothing. Pete jumped up. Don't you touch me. You dare to have an affair, cheat on me, and then bring the other man's juices into our bedroom. Get out of my sight. Just get out. No, Pete, this is my house too. There's no need for anyone to leave anyone, she said firmly. As I said, this is just a fling that I am sure will end in a few months. I wanted to tell you before you found out some other way and got hurt. This way, we can put it in the correct perspective, and you will know it means nothing. Pete just stared at her. It means nothing to our relationship? What relationship? You are such a whore. You have another man's juices running down your leg, and you see nothing wrong with that. When did you lose your morals? When did you lose your values? And when did you decide that our marriage vows meant nothing to you? Pete grabbed an overnight bag from the closet and began throwing shaving gear, underwear, and a fresh work shirt in it. Well, my dear, if you will not leave, I will. I cannot live with a stranger, and you are a stranger. You are not the woman I married. I don't know who you are. I will leave word where I will be in a day or so, but for right now, stay out of my sight, Pete said, his voice trembling with anger. Jen tried to stop Pete. Honey, we can work this out. Please, let's talk. Pete roughly pushed her, and she fell against the wall, hurting her shoulder. He had caused her physical pain. This was not the Pete she loved. She slapped his face with her open hand. Pete stopped and blinked at her. You slapped me? You tell me you're cheating on me, and now you slap me? Who the hell are you? Pete said in a level tone. It is me. I was just stunned by your reaction. You never lifted your hand against me in all of our married life. I just responded. I am sorry. It was wrong to do. Are you apologizing for slapping me or cheating on me? Pete said in a level tone. My thing with Brad is not cheating. There is no love. It is just lust, and you are benefiting from it. Hasn't our sex life been great since I started screwing Brad? Have you wanted for anything? Have I been less than the wife you married? What have you lost from my little games with Brad? What have I lost? I've lost ever trusting you again. I've lost my best friend and my lover. I've lost more than you can imagine. Don't you see that? No, I don't. Suddenly, Jen brightened. Look, I know how to put this. Remember that water bubble in the shower door you just told me about? Well, what I have done and will continue to do until I get it out of my system is no more than that water drop in the shower door. Jen went on, does it affect the usefulness or integrity of the door? No. When that water bubble evaporates, there is no indication it was even there. The glass is still pristine, and the bathroom floor is still dry. That is the impact of my fling with Brad. Just a water bubble in the door. When it is gone, nothing is changed and nothing is damaged. Pete thought for a moment. Jen, I do love you and always will, but I cannot accept that your fling is not damaging our relationship. For right now, I will leave. You do what you think is best. Just remember, as I said about the shower door, the water bubble will result in either the door being repaired or replaced. It is the same with our marriage. So make up your mind with that. Pete left the house. Little did Jen know that it would be the last time they would be in the house together. Jen called Brad and told him what had just happened. Brad suggested she come back to his place, but Jan begged off, saying she needed a little time on her own. Jen still thought Pete had overreacted and would soon come to his senses. Their marriage was great and could overcome this little indiscretion on Jan's part. Jan fell asleep dreaming of another sex session with Brad. Brad was very sympathetic to Jan's home crisis, but he also wanted to continue to be with Jan as she was now his sexual relief. She was good at what she did, screwing Pete, thought Brad. Brad now had her and could use her as he saw fit for his needs. If Pete came to his senses, fine. If not, Brad would use her until he tired of her. Brad was used to vacation cruises. He had been looking at a brochure for the Eastern Caribbean. It was a 2-week cruise hitting over a dozen ports. Since it was now winter and cold, 2 weeks in the Caribbean sounded great. Jen still wasn't staying all night with Brad. She would come to his place for a few hours and then go home. She was hoping that Pete would either call or stop by to discuss their problems, but Pete said he would not return home as long as Jan continued her affair with Brad. Brad had come to Jan's house in an attempt to spend the night with her. Jan had sent her daughter to stay with a girlfriend for the evening. As they had nestled into Pete's marital bed, the phone had rung. It was Pete. He was livid when he found out that Brad was there. Jan also became hysterical when it dawned on her that she was about to have sex with Brad in what should have been Pete's sacred territory. Jan had asked Brad to leave and that she would see him the next day at the office. At work, Brad said to Jan, "Sweetheart, I have wonderful news. I just booked us on a 2-week Caribbean cruise. We can enjoy ourselves without worrying about what Pete thinks. Come with me on the cruise, and I bet Pete will beat a path to your door to get you back when we return. He will be so jealous he will have to come to his senses." Jan had been thinking that this whole thing with Brad was far too costly. Her lust had hurt the one man she loved above all. She thought, "I need just a little quality time with Brad, and I will be over him." Jen readily agreed, and she left this message for Pete at his hotel. "Pete, baby, it's January. Look, I am going on a 2-week cruise with Brad. I think that this will be enough quality time with him to get the lust out of my body and mind. When I get back, I am all yours forever. Have you got that?" I said forever. "Since I will be away for 2 weeks, you can stay here at the house and take care of our daughter, okay? Oh, by the way, that water leak is still in the shower door. It is a little bigger than before, but still no damage to speak of. You can deal with it while you're here. Remember what I said about that water bubble in the door? Well, it is still true." Jen left with Brad on the 2-week cruise. After 10 days, Jen had had her fill of Brad. The fantasy had turned into hard reality. Other than the sex, they had little in common. He basically treated her as a blow-up doll for the duration of the cruise. When they awoke in the mornings, he wanted immediate sex. She didn't want it until they had cleaned up. His mouth had a foul odor in the mornings that turned her off. She did not sleep well because Brad snored heavily. Another chink in the armor of her fantasy lover, she thought. He got drunk on the 7th night at sea, and he smacked my face with his open hand after we argued about me ending the affair, she thought. Upon her return home, she later apologized, but it was far too late. After 14 days, Jen had fallen out of lust with this fantasy, Pete, Brad, and the shower door. On the 14th day, they arrived and poured and flew home. Jen hugged Brad when he delivered her to her front door in the late afternoon, and Jen said, "Brad, it is over. I got my fill of you on this trip. The fantasy is dead along with the lust. All I want now is my Pete. Thank you for the great time, but it is over." Brad looked at her and said, "It is over when I say it's over. You either will do me tonight in your bed, or you will not have a job tomorrow." Jen stood her ground. I am opening this door and calling Pete. I am telling him I am sorry for the way I have been acting. If you are still here after that, I hope he beats some sense in you. I know he can because he is a much more man than you are. You are just a big prick with a set of balls." Brad retorted, "You are just a dumb whore who likes to spread her legs for cheap thrills. Pete will figure out soon that you will always be a whore. When he leaves you, you will come crawling back, and I may let you have me." With that, Brad turned and started toward the car. He turned back and said, "Don't bother coming to the office tomorrow. I will have your desk contents boxed and shipped to you along with your termination pay." Jan unlocked the door and ran into the house. She was reaching for the phone when she saw the letter on the kitchen table. It was addressed to her and written in Pete's erratic scroll. She slowly tore the letter from the envelope and then read, "Jan, you told me to take care of the water bubble in the shower door. First, let me say that you were wrong about the bubble not causing visible damage, but you were right in drawing a correlation between the water bubble and the cheating acts you were doing with Brad. If you had been here, you would have seen that each time the water bubble occurred, it left a small residue on the glass. Over time, the residue clouded the glass. It was no longer pristine, and the clouding did not allow you to see through the glass anymore. If you had been here, you would have seen that the moisture eventually led to mold and mildew forming between the panes of glass. There is now a very large black spot in the glass. Not only is it ugly, but it is also unhealthy to be around, much like our marriage. Your actions have clouded our marriage and introduced unhealthy conditions. As with the shower door, there are two choices. Choice 1, repair the door, take it apart and rebuild it. Choice 2, replace the door. Looking at our marriage, choice 1 was a possibility until you decided to take the 2-week cruise with your lover. After that, no repair was possible in my mind. Choice 2 is my choice. I am replacing the shower door. I am replacing you. I am replacing our marriage. If you had not gone on your love cruise, you would have found your daughter and me waiting to try to repair the marriage. But after introducing the mold and mildew caused by your continued cheating on the cruise, the only option is to replace everything. Your actions are not only unhealthy but actually toxic to my love for you. You have killed my feelings for you. Stephanie and I left on the 3rd day of your cruise. We are now living in a place that will be hard for you to find us. You will be receiving divorce papers from my attorney on the day your cruise is over. The grounds are adultery. The cabin steward on the ship has been deposed, as have the people in Brad's apartment building about your antics. Also, the desk clerks at the various hotels you used for your early liaisons have provided testimony as to your adultery. I even have an audio tape of you talking to me on the phone in your futile attempts at convincing me that your actions were just sex. I have reported Brad to his boss for using his position to have sex with you. He will be fired for cause upon his return to the office. His company is offering me a settlement to make the whole thing go away. I have no doubt that Brad will try to coerce you for continued sex. I believe he will eventually fire you if you don't give him what he wants and expects from you. If he is fired, he cannot hold any control over you at work or in your private life. So hopefully, you can keep your job, although the staff will probably know what is going on. I hope you have thick skin because your job will be your only source of income. You were right, the water bubble is an exact representation of your actions and their results. If I were you, I would look at the shower door and see if you can ever find the Jan I married. You can have the house if you can pay for the mortgage. I have signed my part of the house over to you. Now you can bring your friends with benefits into what was our home with no guilt. I took half of the furniture so Stephanie and I can make a home for ourselves. You can talk to Stephanie after we get settled, but I must insist that she never comes to the house when you have men around. You're not a very good role model for her. Your soon-to-be ex-husband, Pete. Jan dropped the letter and fell to her knees on the floor. She had let sexual lust override the sensible side of her brain. She had lost her wonderful marriage and her best friend because of her animal responses to her lust for Brad. Now, she had nothing but an empty house with a shower door containing a water bubble with mold and mildew, a big dark black spot in the glass door that grew larger each day. She knew she would never repair the shower door because she needed it as a reminder of how wrong she had been. Story 2. Ma'am, we've got to talk. Ambush came on a Sunday evening as we were getting ready to go to bed. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised, as Jeanette, my wife of 4 years, had been acting strange all weekend. I asked her several times if she was not feeling well. No, I feel okay. I just have a lot on my mind, to tell the truth, so did I. The Great Recession had dealt both of our careers setbacks, and we went from having enough money to make dreams come true to barely making it. Not that any of our colleagues were doing any better. Jeanette, however, was having a hard time accepting our financial setback. She grew up without and had gotten used to the niceties to which we availed ourselves, including an annual vacation. She never came right out and blamed me, but then I could hear it in the comments that peppered any discussion of our finances. I wrapped my arms around Jeanette and told her how much I loved her. She didn't return the sentiment. Instead, she did something completely out of character. She got up and poured herself a stiff shot of scotch. She didn't offer me one. I immediately knew she had something big and bad to tell me, and she was trying to work up the courage to start. After dinner, we watched TV in silence the rest of the evening. I have no idea what programs were on. All I could do was worry about my wife. We went upstairs without watching the news. That usually meant we were going to make love. Tonight wasn't usual, unfortunately, neither had any night during the last 3+ weeks. Our love life was a casualty of the economy. I was finishing brushing my teeth when she walked into the bathroom and announced, someone at work invited me on an all-expense-paid ski holiday in Colorado. One of the group had to beg off, and the tickets are non-refundable. We're leaving Wednesday morning, and I'll be back on Monday. I rinsed my mouth and replied, someone at work? Now that's a curious way to phrase it. It makes me believe it was a man who asked you. Jeanette looked guilty as all hell. I think you answered my question. So, what is the name of the man at work who invited you, a married woman, to go on vacation with him? I tried to remain calm. You don't know him? I thought I knew everyone you work with. You do, but I don't exactly work with him. Now you have me confused. You said someone from work. No, I didn't, she protested. I said someone at work. Okay, Bill Clinton. It depends on what the meaning of the word is. Who's the son of a that invited you to go on vacation? He's someone I met in the cafeteria at work. His office is on the 5th floor, and we've had lunch together a few times. I tried real hard not to lose control, but my voice filled the room. How long have you been having an affair? Jeanette began crying. In between sobs, she managed to say, I would never cheat on you. How can you say something that hurtful? Maybe because you forgot to mention you've been having lunch with another man, or that you became such good friends he invited you, a married woman, to go skiing in Colorado with him. And we haven't made love in almost a month. I think that about covers it. It's not like that. He's a real nice guy, but his girlfriend dumped him, and he doesn't want to waste a ticket. Everything is already paid for, hotel, lift tickets. It won't cost me anything. Isn't that convenient? Now, what is his name? I thundered. John. Does JN have a last name, Johnson or Jackson, something like that? You got me so upset I can't think. So you want to fly across the country with a man whose name you don't even know? You're either screwing him or you're an idiot. The volume and passion of the argument exploded. At some point, I asked, who exactly are these friends you'll be sharing this cabin with? Friends of John's. There's 2 other couples. 2 other couples? That means you're going as his date. No, I keep telling you, he doesn't want to waste the non-refundable ticket, so he asked a married woman to be his date. Why don't you trust me? Would you trust me if I told you I met a woman in the cafeteria, and she invited me to go on vacation with her? Yes, remember how jealous you got when I was explaining the infield fly rule to that beautiful woman sitting next to us at Wrigley Field last summer? You started a fight with her. The ushers threw us out of the ballpark. That was different. You were ignoring me. Oh, and you're not going to be ignoring me when you're sharing a cabin with John and 4 total strangers. Jeanette screamed, then stormed out of the room. It was a long, sleepless night. Jeanette and I tossed and turned until about 2, when we both collapsed into sleep. I was up at 6 and had a pot of coffee. Brute, she poured a cup, took a sip, threw it in the sink, and said, I'm going to work. I knew when my wife dug in her heels, she would rather lose an argument than admit she was wrong. She was the most stubborn person I had ever met. I spent the drive into work formulating a plan to save my marriage. I knew appealing to logic wouldn't work. This called for a good, swift kick in the pants, as my grandmother would say. About a year ago, I took a chance hiring a street-smart young man who served time in the county jail for robbing a convenience store. He kept reminding me that he owed me big time for taking a chance on an ex-con. "You say it, boss, and I'll do it," he always said. I decided to call in that marker. "Julio, I need a favor." "Tell me what it is, and it's done," I explained my predicament to Julio. "You want me to mess him up?" "Maybe later, but first I need his name and where he works." I gave him a picture of my wife and the address of her office building. "There's a cafeteria in the basement. She goes to lunch every day at noon. I need you to get a picture of John without being spotted. When he's done eating, I want you to follow him upstairs and see where he goes. Give me the name of his employer." "Got it, boss." "Then, at quitting time, I want you to follow him and get the license plate number of his car." "I'm your man, boss. And, Julio, don't worry. I'll take care of your time card." I kept checking my watch. I was sure Jeanette would meet up with her boyfriend to tell him how unreasonable I was. It was a typical Monday. I was snowed under with work, but time dragged by. At 1:10, my phone rang. "Boss, it's me." I got the picture. They were talking, but I couldn't get close enough to hear what. When they were done, I followed him into the elevator. He acted like I wasn't even there. I got off when he did and pretended to be looking for a room number. He ducked into 510. The sign said Anderson Metallurgy Supplies LLC. "Julio, you did great, but you're only half done." "Don't worry, boss. I'll follow him like a shadow. Send me the picture." The moment I hung up, I pulled up Google on my screen. I wasn't too optimistic as I typed John Johnson. I got a lot of name matches, but none matched the photo. Next, I tried John Jackson. No luck, the names were as common as dirt. So, I tried Anderson Metallurgy Supplies LLC and learned they were one of the largest suppliers of powdered metals to the industry, whatever that means. They didn't have any names or pictures of employees, so I called the number listed and asked for John Johnson. "There's no one here by that name." "I'm sorry, I always get those confused. I meant John Jackson." "There's no one here by that name either. Do you have the correct company?" "I must have dialed wrong. Sorry to have bothered you." I stared at the computer, trying to think of a way to figure out who that son of a witch actually was when my phone rang again. "Boss, it's me." After we hung up, I ducked into the men's room to grab a smoke. Guess who followed me? Jackson? Johnson? Only none of those are his real name. "Did he see you?" I was in the stall getting ready to light up when he came in. I watched him through the gap between the wall and the door. He took a piss but didn't wash his hands. As he was walking out, a dude my age came in and said, "Hello, Mr. Jensen." He didn't say a word, so I waited until he left and said, "Hey, was that John Jackson?" He said, "No, man. He's Robert Jensen. Looks like a real prick." "You got that right." He bummed a cigarette, and I headed outside. "Julio, you'd make a great spy." "Thanks, boss." Unfortunately, I got called into a logistics meeting which lasted until quitting time and couldn't spend any time on research. That would have to wait until morning. Julio called as I was backing into the garage. He came out of the elevator a few minutes before 3, and I followed him across the parking lot to the subway station. The train was pretty crowded, so I hung out at the other end of the car with a bunch of Mexicans speaking Spanish, I think. Jensen was afraid to look at us. He sat there with his briefcase in his lap like we were going to steal it. He got off at Logan Square, and I followed him home. He lives in the basement apartment of a 2-flat about a block off the boulevard, 2366, North Kimball Avenue. It's got burglar bars but no curtains on the windows, so I could see inside. It's a real dump. I had nothing else to do, so I hung out in the gangway next door to see if he went anywhere. About 10 minutes later, he brought out a stack of pizza boxes and threw them in the garbage cart. Then he came out with 2 real big garbage bags. After he went inside, I grabbed them both. That's how my friends steal identities. People throw away too much good. Boss, I don't know who Jackson Johnson is, but I've got a whole bunch of legal-looking stuff that says his name is Robert Jensen. Julio, that's good work. I can't talk anymore now. We'll go over everything tomorrow, right? Boss, what I now knew gave me an idea. I walked in and found Jeanette eating a hamburger and fries at the kitchen table. She didn't seem to have bought anything for me. I ignored the slight and sat down across from her. In order for us to have a rational discussion, I demand several things. Jeanette started to say something, but I told her to wait until I was finished, then she could talk all she wanted. I'm not stupid. I haven't forgotten the way you phrased your vacation announcement to make me think you were going with a woman from work. So it's time for full disclosure. I need John's last name, address, email address, cell phone number, and where he works. Next, I will need copies of the airplane tickets and the address of the mountain chalet he rented. If something happened to you, God forbid, I don't want to have to tell the police I let my wife go somewhere in Colorado, but I don't know where or with whom. Don't get so dramatic, I stopped her again. I speak first, then you. It always pissed my wife off when I wouldn't let her talk over me. I also want the names and phone numbers for the other couples. Now, you may answer. He didn't rent the chalet, it belongs to his uncle. And John doesn't have a cell phone. What do you mean, 5-year-old kids have cell phones? Everyone does. Well, he doesn't. So if I get you all of this, will you stop bullying me and let me have fun? Her face perked up, she smiled. You have 1 day to get me everything. Why don't you admit you're jealous because I'm going to Colorado? I pounded my fist on the table. I'm not jealous. I'm pissed off because in all the time we were dating and in the 4+ years we've been married, you never once mentioned anything about going skiing anywhere. Now, come hell or high water, you want to go skiing in Colorado with some strange guy you met in the cafeteria, and you wonder why I think you're having an affair. I swear I'm not, she screamed. Get me the information. If it checks out, we'll talk. I was so tempted to tell her that her boyfriend gave her a fake name, but I wanted to see how Jensen would respond. We slept about as far apart as a queen-sized mattress would permit. However, Jeanette actually was civil the next morning, and we had coffee together. I got to the office early and paced the floor until Julio arrived. Jeanette was leaving tomorrow, and this was my last chance to save my marriage. Julio brought a large cardboard box into work. He had gone through the bags and threw out the real garbage. The rest was stuff you should never throw out in the trash: financial records, checking account statements, and certified mail from a lawyer's office. He tore the envelopes in half. Like that's going to stop an identity thief, I went through and taped everything back together that looked important and put them in some kind of order. The first item he handed me was a legal-size envelope, sent certified mail to Robert Jensen. That man is being taken to court for not paying child support. He's got, 2 little kids, and he hasn't paid her a dime in over a year. The next item was a bench warrant for failure to appear for non-payment of child support, Julio explained. The police are so busy, they won't even go to your house to pick you up. What they do is put your name in the database. If you have any contact with the cops, even a traffic ticket, they haul you off to jail. So I guess I have to arrange for him to meet some of Chicago's finest. Julio laughed at that. Good idea, boss. Boss. Next came a packet of overdraft notices and checks, returned stamped NSF. He got a dozen notices from the bank before they closed his account. Julio saved the best for last, a printout of the airline reservations. It's weird, his ticket is round trip, but your wife's is only one way. That is not good, boss. With the record identifier, you can cancel the tickets. I had another idea. I would separate the lovebirds by changing Jensen's seat assignment to the back of the plane and buying the newly vacated one for myself. After we reviewed all of the documents, I did a search of the Chicago Tribune archives and learned why Jensen used a fake name. He was a convicted sexual offender. Even though the attack occurred in Denver, Jensen was a Chicagoan, and all 3 daily papers printed the story. In his mugshot, there was no doubt it was him. They didn't give too many details because there was a plea agreement to spare the victim from a trial. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of sexual assault and was sentenced to 24 months incarceration. While he was a guest at the Gray Bar Hotel, his wife divorced him. A visit to the sex offender registry confirmed his home address. It also warned that he had been released after serving only 14 months due to prison overcrowding. The first thing he did was track down his ex-wife and beat her so badly she ended up in a hospital for almost a month. 2 felony convictions, and my wife thinks he's a real nice guy. I took an early lunch and walked down to the courthouse to buy a copy of Jensen's divorce decree. It cost 25 cents a sheet photocopying fee. The filing included a copy of his arrest warrant from the sexual assault. He drugged a young lady he had taken skiing and assaulted her. I also researched do-it-yourself divorce filings at the law library. I found a great template online and filled it out for grounds. I claimed adultery and attached time-stamped photos of them in the cafeteria, not eating, but talking for a solid hour like 2 lovers would. My last stop was the Circuit Court of Cook County Domestic Relations Division, where I filed my petition for dissolution of marriage. I had 3 copies made with the official seal and a case number stamped on them. I told my supervisor I would need a few personal days off. He's a good guy and didn't ask. Word. Jeanette was making dinner when I walked in. It was a real dinner, not something out of a box. I guess she was trying to put me in a good mood. I hugged her and kissed her. She responded, not as good as I would have liked, but anything was better than nothing. Jeanette reached into her purse and took out a folded piece of paper. Here, I got you everything you wanted. Like I said, John Johnson doesn't have a phone, but I got you his email address, and he's on Facebook. Where does he work? He has a promotion and hasn't received his new business cards yet. I looked at her like she had 2 heads and no brain in either. And he couldn't tell you the name of his employer? I opened my laptop and went straight to Google Maps. I entered the address of the chalet, strike 1. Then I tried the official Denver zoning map, strike 2. I kept trying every mapping program I could find. Honey, I called out, there seems to be a problem. I ran the chalet address through 6 different mapping programs, plus the assessor's webpage, and they all agree there is no such address. He must have transposed a digit or something. What about the tickets? She said. He said we get those at the airport. No, you get the boarding pass at the airport. You know that from when we went to Maui. Next, I called the phone numbers he gave for the other 2 couples. Neither was a working number. I tried doing online searches on their names and came up blank. I had no better luck on Facebook. Honey, I'm sorry to say, but none of the information Johnson, if that is his real name, gave you is legit. That means there's no way in hell I'm letting you go. Foolish me, I thought she would admit there was something fishy with Johnson. Instead, the next thing I knew, my dinner, while still in the frying pan, came flying by and crashed against the wall. Too bad it smelled good. You're not letting me, she screamed. Who the hell are you to say where I can and can't go? Your husband. Why are you being so unreasonable? All I'm doing is going skiing with a friend. A man who has lied to you about everything. You don't even know where you're going. He didn't lie. Maybe he doesn't want you causing trouble. Is he afraid I'll show up at your love nest and spoil his seduction? Jeanette lost it, spit flying out of her mouth as she ranted. Stop saying that. We'll never be anything more than friends. I'm going skiing and you're not going to stop me. You want to go skiing? Fine, I'll take you skiing. With what money? We're broke, remember? I have 2 mayonnaise jars full of silver coins I've been saving since I was a teenager. I was going to spend them on a getaway for our 5th anniversary. I'll cash them in now and either spend the money on a vacation with my wife or paying a divorce attorney. It's your choice. Stop threatening me. I'm not threatening you. I am making a solemn vow, and you know I keep my word. I don't understand. Why don't you trust me? You're a beautiful woman. Johnson's proven himself to be less than a gentleman by not backing off when he learned your husband objects to his wife going on vacation with him. I told you, he's only taking me because the ticket is non-refundable. I'll reimburse him for the ticket and still have enough left for us to go skiing. It's too late. We're leaving tomorrow morning, and I have no way to get a hold of them, Jeanette. I'm not stupid. I will never be cued by you. Any man who would let his wife do what you want to do is not a real man. Ask yourself how you're going to explain to your parents, family, and friends why you're getting divorced. Don't give me that. I told you I would come home relaxed and make it up to you. Please, I'm begging you. It's not too late to save our marriage. I told you, I can't cancel. I promised John we'd go, and it's too late for him to find someone else. So you'll keep your promise to a proven liar at the expense of the vow we made in front of God and all of our friends and family? I keep telling you, nothing is going to happen. It doesn't matter if nothing happens. You made your choice. You picked him over our marriage. I spent the night on the couch. I could hear Jeanette crying in the bedroom. My mind was at war with my heart. The logical part of me wanted to let her get hurt and gloat over the corpse when the inevitable happened, while the emotional component said I should be the knight in shining armor and save my marriage. I spent a sleepless night debating long and hard which I wanted. In the end, I decided to compromise. I was up before the sun. Jeanette ignored me. I really pissed her off when I took a picture of you with my phone. Why did you do that? She demanded. So the police will have a current picture in case they have to ID your body. She let loose with a string of obscenities. I walked into the bedroom as she was packing her suitcase. If you get on the plane with him, I won't be here when you come back. Pack, our marriage will be over. She gave me a dirty look and said, I know you're not that stupid. Funny, I thought the same about you. I guess we were both wrong. I walked out without kissing her goodbye. I parked my car down the block and watched her leave. Then I went back inside and shaved off my distinctive beard and mustache. Next, I dressed in my black suit with a white shirt and narrow black tie. My wife called this my funeral attire, which I guess was fitting as I was going to witness the death of our marriage. A pair of sunglasses completed my disguise. I grabbed my briefcase and a couple of suitcases stuffed with my clothes and set off for the last roll of the dice. I was at the gate when Julio called a few minutes after 8. He was outside Jensen's basement apartment. Boss, you aren't going to believe this. They got in a big argument. Your wife wanted to drive to the airport, but the chauffeur said it was cheaper to take the subway. She even offered to pay for parking, but he told her to keep her money as they would need it when they got to Colorado. I checked her wallet while she was in the bathroom. She had less than $100. I hope she wasn't planning on using our joint credit cards because I canceled them right after I bought my ticket. I wish I could read Jeanette's mind as she had to carry her bags down the stairs to the dark underground labyrinth Chicagoans call the subway. The Blue Line train would be packed with people going to work. Julio thought a man flying to Denver to go skiing in December didn't have a proper winter coat or even gloves. As he watched them being jostled by the crowd, Jeanette's dream vacation was already on rocky ground. The ride took a little over half an hour. Julio followed them into the terminal and watched Jensen print out their boarding passes. Fortunately, he didn't look at them very closely and hadn't noticed I changed his seat location right before I bought my ticket. Julio called again to say they reached the TSA checkpoint, so he could go no further. Thanks for everything. You've been a huge help. The screener at the X-ray machine flagged Jeanette's carry-on bag. Please step over here, ma'am. Soon, a minimum wage earner was rummaging through her clothes until he found the corkscrew I hid in the inside zipper pocket. When I rifled the bags to see what she had packed, to my relief, there was nothing remotely sexy. The TSA agent read her the riot act and confiscated the corkscrew. The timing would have to be perfect for my plan to work. I had paid for early boarding and was one of the first on the plane. I claimed my center seat. My wife had the window seat. I decided to give her a second chance if she sat next to me so I could show her my evidence. Luck was on my side, and the man who had the aisle seat boarded a couple of minutes later. I was happy to see he was a very fit-looking young man. By the buzz cut, I assumed he was a college athlete. Slowly but surely, the rows ahead of us filled. The stragglers searched the overhead bins for a place to stow their carry-on bags. A couple of minutes later, the festivities began. "Hey, a-hole, you're in my seat." Jensen stuck his ticket in my seatmate's face. Jeanette had turned the other way to force her suitcase into the overhead compartment but looked back when she heard the commotion. The guy sitting in the aisle said, "Look at the row number, you're way back by the bathrooms." Jensen unleashed a profanity-laden screed about how incompetent the airline was. He capped it off with, "Then move your fat ass to the back of the plane and let me sit next to my girlfriend." Jeanette heard him call her that but did not object. Instead, she said, "John, since he doesn't want to, maybe you should ask the man in the middle to change seats." Without my beard and mustache, she didn't recognize me right away. The sunglasses helped. By now, a flight attendant had pushed her way through the crowd, and the purser had come from the aft galley to see what the commotion was. She glowered at Jensen and demanded he take his seat so they could finish boarding the plane. "This flight is packed. Take your assigned seat, and we'll see if we can move you after takeoff." I paid to sit next to my girlfriend. Jensen was waving his ticket. Jeanette finally realized I was sitting in the center seat. "What the hell are you doing on my plane? You did this. You're humiliating me." "I'm humiliating you? You're a married woman, and this piece of shit is calling you his girlfriend." He only said that to get him to change seats. Her voice returned to venom. Jeanette stepped into the empty row in front of me and continued her tirade. "You a-hole. I knew you were going to ruin my vacation. I hate you. I hate being married to you." I knew she would be mad, but I must be stupid because I never expected her to say that. I felt like my soul died. I was in shock. Tears were running down my face as I looked my wife square in the eye. "Robert Jensen is your boyfriend. The reason he doesn't want you to know his real name is because this real nice guy has an outstanding arrest warrant for non-payment of child support. I guess he could afford to take my wife on vacation because he wasn't taking care of his own children." I opened my briefcase and handed her a copy of the bench warrant. "You might want to read this." Jeanette looked at the document, her voice quivered. "John, what's going on? Is that true? While you're at it, you might ask your boyfriend why he didn't buy you a return ticket." I handed her their trip itinerary, showing hers was a one-way ticket only. Jeanette was getting worried. "John, why don't I have a return ticket?" He ignored her plea and continued arguing with the flight attendant. "You're not going to tell me he forgot to tell you he spent 2 years in jail for beating his wife so badly she spent almost a month in the hospital? I have pictures." I handed her a couple of shots of a woman whose face looked like it was hit by a truck. "That real nice guy did this to her." "John, please tell me he's making this up." Jensen didn't answer. He was too busy telling the flight attendant what he thought of her and her airline. "You better make him move, or else." I was on a roll. It's amazing what you can find if you Google someone's real, I drew out the word real, name. "Here's the newspaper stories if you don't believe me." I handed her half a dozen articles. His mug shot is in each one. "In case you think I'm making this up, I don't understand." Jeanette was very confused. "Come now, surely he told you he's a registered sex offender." Damn, the plane got quiet as I shouted that. "Tell me if this sounds familiar. He talked a naive young lady into going skiing in Colorado instead of hitting the slopes. He drugged her, and he and his buddies took turns assaulting her. She was able to escape after a week in captivity. That earned him 4 years in jail." Jeanette was sobbing. "John, please tell me that didn't happen." He was too busy arguing with the flight attendant and didn't respond. "Try Robert. Robert Jensen, that's his real name." Jensen wasn't the smartest predator, but it finally seemed to have sunk in. I had derailed his plan. He screamed, "I'm going to kill you," and lunged at me. Unfortunately for him, I moved, and his fist connected hard with the flight attendant's face. All hell broke loose in the narrow aisle. My seatmate, who, it turns out, is a starting defensive tackle at a Big Ten college, was on him in a heartbeat and restrained him until Chicago's finest slapped handcuffs on his wrists. The news called him a hero. The airline upgraded him to a seat in first class as a reward. Jensen found out it's a felony for assaulting a member of a flight crew. Surprisingly, telling the police officer, "You didn't mean to hit the flight attendant, you were trying to kill your girlfriend's husband," didn't elicit a lot of sympathy. I handed Jeanette every last piece of damning evidence I had collected. I swear to God, every word I said is the truth. Jeanette stared at the pile of documents without looking at them. It's over now, let's go home. I threw my arms open, praying she would let me embrace her. Instead, my wife ignored the invitation and stood in silence, her head bowed, staring at the floor. She didn't say one word. Not one word. Then it got worse. As the police were hauling Jensen off the plane, I could hear him screaming over and over, "Hey, Manzel. I had your wife." My eyes pleaded with her to say he's a liar, that never happened. She turned away in silence. An airline security guard told Jeanette and me that we were being remanded to the custody of the Chicago Police Department for our roles in the melee. Before we moved, I heard a flight attendant say, "Let the gate agent know 3 seats just open up." I said a prayer of thanks. The other passengers stared at us as we walked by. It seemed like everyone had a cell phone clicking pictures. Now Jeanette knew what it was like to really be humiliated. She didn't say a single word during her walk of shame. I don't think she knew what would hit her. I also felt numb, my knees were buckling, and I had to concentrate to walk somehow. I managed to hold my head up. I wanted to tell everyone I did everything I could. Everything I could, everything went exactly as scripted. Well, almost everything. I saved Jeanette but lost my wife. The police took us to separate rooms to question us. Homeland Security was there too. I spent the next hour explaining all I knew about Jensen. The detective said, "Wait here," and left me alone with a cup of stale coffee for the next 2 hours while they called their brethren in Denver. I paced back and forth like an inmate while I debated with myself the marriage-ending question. Did my wife have sex with Jensen, or did that son of a witch throw that out to destroy us? If she didn't do it, why didn't she say so? On and on the debate raged. When the detective finally returned, he said they found a very receptive audience in Colorado. "Your wife threw up all over herself when I showed her pictures they sent over of the chalet, a tar paper shack at the back of an auto salvage yard, and what they had in store for her inside." Jensen had 4 infamous friends, 2 couples waiting for their arrival. They had prepared the shack with restraints and shackles so she couldn't run away. We found enough sedatives hidden in his bag to knock out a circus elephant for a week. It didn't take much persuasion to get them to tell their plans for his next victim. "It would not have ended well for your wife," the detective said. All color drained from her face as they read her their confessions. Then she passed out cold. When he was finished, the detective asked if I would like to use the room to talk privately with my wife. From the tone of his voice, I could tell that was a question. "Yes, sir." I clicked open the locks on my briefcase and took out the divorce petition. "What's that?" the detective asked. I told Jeanette I would divorce her if she got on the plane with Jensen. "Have you no compassion? That woman is broken, damn near suicidal. She's in shock from learning how close she came to being murdered. You said you did all of this to save your marriage. Hand her that, and you'll destroy her." I was unmoved. The part of me that loved her had died. She knows she messed up big time. Right now, you're the good guy. You pulled off an incredible plan to rescue your wife. You're a regular Liam Neeson. You can't walk away from her. I broke the silence. I plan to give these to her at their love nest. However, looking at the current situation, even after all she did, if Jeanette says I'm sorry, I will tear these up today. But I still plan to divorce her. I give you my word. But you can't tip her off. You've got my word. A minute later, he led my wife into the room. I got one quick glimpse before she buried her face in her hands. She looked like death and stank of vomit. She collapsed into the chair and began sobbing. The detective lorded over her as he said, "Mrs. Menzel, I've been a police officer for over 29 years, and what you did was the most stupid thing I ever heard of. If a person ever deserved to be murdered, it's you. You should thank God with every breath you take for your husband and for every heartbeat he gave you. You owe him for the rest of your life." He closed the door on the way out. The only sound was my wife sucking air in between sobs. Not a word. Not a thank you. Not an I'm sorry. Nothing. Finally, after about 5 minutes, I got tired of waiting for her to talk. "You sold out our marriage for a ski trip worth less than $1,500. That's all our dreams were worth. After this, how could I ever trust you not to leave me for the next shiny bauble? My mind was pleading for her to talk. She said not a word. Tears streamed down my face as I waited for her to say something, anything. When I couldn't take it anymore, I said, if at any time you said I'm sorry, I would have torn this paper up. I can't wait any longer. I handed her a copy of the divorce decree. Jeanette screamed so loud when she read it, the detective ran back in to make sure she was okay. I already packed my clothes. Anything I left behind, you can donate or throw away. I handed her my keys to our apartment and walked away. I never looked back. The next time I met her was at court. The judge ordered us to enter counseling. I reluctantly went along with it, but I never intended to reconcile with her. During the sessions, the counselor was able to see how manipulative my ex-wife was. As planned, the sessions failed, and after 7 months, I was a free man. I never heard from Jeanette again, not that I wanted to. Jensen was charged with conspiracy with intent to harm a person. He is still serving his time. I hope they keep him there forever.